Is Donald John Trump, President Trump, really a criminal?
Is he really a criminal? It's a tough topic. I hear so many really close people to me right now saying, no, he's not, and he's been treated completely unfair. I hear other people that are very close to me saying, of course he is. He's completely corrupt. I know and love people on both sides of this discussion. And I think it's just a deep topic to get into. Let's get into it.
I'm going to break it down for you like a legal surgeon.
Okay.
Right? I'm a political atheist or a political agnostic.
Okay. Break it down for us.
Yeah. So there's 4 cases. The one criminal case is out of the federal courthouse by Jack Smith. Was the United States attorney. So the Department of Justice is going after Donald Trump in one direction for the following crimes. Number 1 is being charged with conspiracy to defraud the United States. Number 2, the conspiracy to obstruct an official proceeding. And number 3, an obstruction of an attempt to obstruct an official proceeding. And the last one is conspiracy against the rights. We could go over each one, what that means if you want to.
Those are all related to a single event or a series of events around the election?
That's relating to strictly January 6th and Donald Trump's President Trump. I'm saying President Trump respectfully.
Me too.
I don't want anybody to think, oh, he's saying President Trump, he must be a Republican. I say that about President Obama. I give him all respect. So we're going to refer to him as President Trump.
I agree.
So President Trump is alleged to have basically trying to commit a conspiracy with Giuliani, John Eastman, Sidney Powell, Kenneth Chesborough, to overturn the election when all else failed in the legal world for President Trump. He just ran out of options in the legal world. He lost all his complaints of fraud. So what the indictment is now claiming is that he basically went into CIA mode, I want to call it, or covert mode. He basically got a team of people, 20 people, 20 of the president's men. Maybe that'll be a book about that.
Okay.
20 of the president's men that basically were willing to do whatever it took to get President Trump allegedly. And again, I'm only alleging this based on the indictment. I don't want anybody saying that this is what I'm saying. I'm basing this on an indictment, reading the indictment. The indictment is alleging that President Trump conspired with Giuliani and the rest of them to undo the election, to subvert the intent of the rights of people like you and myself, which is count 4. The obstructing charge relates to him trying to undo the certain states like Arizona, Michigan, the contested states, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. He allegedly directed Giuliani to go to the legislature and say, hey, listen, we got videos that show there was clear fraud of these people that are voting, dead people voting, things like that. So that goes to count 3, the obstruction charge. Additionally, he's also intertwined with that is the obstructing with Michael Pence, the vice president, calling him and telling him that he has absolute authority to undo or not certify the electoral votes on January 6th, which is part of the Electoral Commission Act, which says basically by a certain date, which is on January 6th, all the states need to certify that the votes were taken in and that President Joseph Robin Biden was actually the person that was elected. So what count 3 is saying is allegedly he was calling Mike Pence and telling him, Mike, you don't have to certify this. You could just object to it, and this was part of the plot, allegedly, object to it and let the Republican legislator and the court system handle it. So basically throwing a grenade by Mike Pence not doing this is throwing a grenade into the procedural system, which would have basically, honestly, if Mike Pence did it, Trump would have been in power.
What exactly was he asking Mike Pence not to do or to do?
To not certify the election. The vice presidential powers up until now, and depending on who you believe, John Eastman, who's a conservative lawyer, believes that it's not merely ceremonial in nature, that the vice president, could object to the certification of the presidential, the sealing of who won, basically.
It seems like it's not purely ceremonial, because if it was, we wouldn't be talking about it, because it clearly was a pivotal moment where Mike Pence could have not certified, right? So there was a fork in the road there, correct?
Well, yes, and you got to also remember that this was the first time in history that this has ever been challenged before. Nobody's ever challenged whether or not a vice president has the authority to do it or not do it. John Eastman seems to think that he had the power to do it.
Okay. So this was one. So this is sort of the January 6th. This is more of the election interference federal charge.
Yes.
Can we for a second talk about the other charges?
Sure. So in the federal case, so that's count 3. The other one is obstructing an official proceeding that has to do with Mike Pence, them trying to block Mike Pence. Also, they went to legislatures. Giuliani allegedly went and showed them videos, like just snippets of videos, according to legislature. It was so bad, actually, that the
Snippets of video.
well, not the whole thing. According to the legislatures, even the Republicans came out and said, look, Giuliani, you're just showing us a little part of the video, not the whole video. What you're showing looks bad, but if you watch the whole video, it makes sense. So he was nitpicking what to show legislature in order to facilitate the theory that Trump's election was being robbed. And in reality, what they're saying, it was with malicious intent. Does that make sense? Malicious intent meaning that Giuliani knew or should have known that it was fake.
Let me understand.
Yeah.
So Giuliani was allegedly bringing some sort of pressure on the legislature to act in President Trump's favor, but
Yes.
that would have been at a stage after the Mike Pence refusal to certify, right?
No, so if you go in a timeline, how it works is that he lost the election. 7 days later, basically, he starts lawsuits. And after he loses the lawsuits, a week after that, he assigns a special team that was headed by Giuliani, according to the indictment again. And he spearheaded this theory that there was an election that was stolen. So he had Giuliani do whatever was necessary to go to Arizona and to the contested states of it was Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, New Mexico, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. And they even went, now here's where the crime allegedly comes in. And this is very
Nebulous.
or as they say in the streets, shady. Mm-hmm. So Giuliani allegedly got fake electors to go and say, hey, by the way, Tony, your job is over. We're taking over now. And we got the votes to get Trump back into power. So almost sounds like a Russian Putin-esque thing that was going on. Again, allegedly.
Allegedly, they would have replaced electors.
They would have replaced electors, and then they would add brand new votes that the new electors would have said these are going to certify that Trump was in fact the winner. So that's part of the allegation that was faked.
Okay.
Basically, in a nutshell, what that means in street language, you try to fake the win. So what Trump is alleging that they stole, in irony, the federal government saying, not only are you wrong, but you're the guy that's now trying to steal the election.
Got it.
So
there's a fundamental question of fact here. Did Joe Biden actually steal the election from Trump, or did somehow Trump try to steal the election from Joe Biden? And this is at the crux of the issue. So far,
Right.
The way the facts seem to have landed, Joe Biden was clearly elected fairly. And then after the fact, it seems like President Trump made some moves to try to change that potentially. That's what's alleged.
That's what's alleged. And I'm going to explain to you why Trump did that based on reading the indictment. And to a certain extent, all right, I'm not defending him. Well, maybe I am, but to a certain extent, I see his mindset. Now, I'm going to get to that in a second. Let's talk about that. But the first count one is basically to defraud the United States. Okay. So let's go back into what happened. Trump had people in his ear, all right? And, Trump allegedly liked what he heard. He liked the fact that he heard that there were dead people that were voting for him. He liked the fact that he heard that there were citizens that were not part of that state that were voting for him. That the machines, the Dominion voting machines, the software was off. So obviously, from the perspective of the movement, and just my opinion, that, and again, this is based on reading a lot of books, okay? Revenge by Michael Cohen, all of Trump's books. I've read every single probably book that he's read. Again, I'm not a Trump fan, but I'm from New York, just to disclose. I'm from Queens. He's from Queens. When I was growing up, everybody knew who Trump was in New York. He was sort of James Bond when I was growing up. Again, I don't have one opinion of him or another. I'm just letting you know.
Right.
So what happened was, in my opinion, Trump was listening to his lawyers were saying, or the campaign manager, not the campaign manager actually, but people that were telling him, you didn't lose. There was some fraud going on. And there was fraud going on. but not to the extent that he was saying.
Right.
There was, I think, 4 people that were dead in one of the states. That was proven. There was like 2 people dead in another state. There was a couple of disparities, but like one of the Michigan electors said, no system is perfect. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I think most people reasonably would stipulate that every single election in history has had some level of fraud.
Of course.
Even if it's 1 or 2 people, could be a couple.
Has to be,
could
statistically.
Could be a couple hundred people.
That's
could be
right.
thousands.
Right.
It's probably not statistically significant in this case. At least we haven't really seen the evidence that there was fraud to the level to shift the 2020 election away from the real winner, Donald Trump. We haven't seen evidence of that.
Well, the theory of Jack Smith is that he picked a state to lean on. He believed that Georgia was a ruby red state, and he believed that it was a Republican state that could back him, and the margin was razor thin by 11,780 votes. As he said, he needs Brad Raffensperger to find. You remember that call? I just need you to find 11,780 votes or thereabout. So that's the Georgia case right here. So Georgia case.
Now we're transitioning a little bit from the
Yeah.
federal, I'm going to call it the election tampering case, even
Right.
though I know it's deeper than that.
Right.
To the Georgia election tampering case.
Yeah.
Again, another crime under state law.
Right. And well, this is what's unusual is that they're basically going after him in federal and in for state. But the teeth of the Georgia is much more significant than the teeth of the federal case. He could actually probably dodge prison in the federal case, but the Georgia case calls for mandatory prison time.
How much? How much?
I'd have to take a look at it. It's a few years. I don't know off the top of my hand, but he's looking at mandatory time.
Can I just ask, if he were to be given, if he were to be actually convicted in the state of Georgia for this crime of election tampering or whatever it's officially called under the criminal code, and if he was jailed or sent to prison, and then if he were to win the election, the 2024 election, which he very well could win, he's up in
the polls in the battleground states right now by 5 or 6 points. So you're right.
It's a distinct possibility.
Right.
Would the federal justice system or the power of the executive branch and being president somehow trump the prison sentence given on the lower state level? Because you need your executive to have liberty and freedom of movement to actually govern the nation. Doesn't that level trump, odd word, no pun intended, the lower state level sentence or conviction or removal of liberty to lock somebody up? How would that work?
I think procedurally what the government would do is they would stay the proceeding.
Got it. So he'd be let out just to govern the country?
The government is allowed to have powers of what's called staying the proceeding. Staying means freezing it. So he could arguably, and I think this is what they would do if hypothetically he's convicted, they wouldn't sentence him right away. They would put sentencing over. What that means is you would continue the sentencing for a future court date and then resolve it at that point. So they kick the can down the road.
Wow. Okay. So because I can hear people thinking this is for sure a conspiracy against former President Trump, potentially the next President Trump, to try to derail him in the polls, to try to circumvent, to try to kick him off his horse because he's winning the race. Is it a political attack? You've got criminal charges on a federal level. You've got a criminal charge in Georgia, another one in New York. I think there's one in Florida. These are criminal charges brought against him. Could these be political attacks just to derail him and to keep the White House in Democratic hands?
Well, certainly the indictments have 2 benefits. One benefit is you attack your opponent politically, right? It hurts him politically. And one, you literally could put him in jail and bar him from running ever again, which is what they're trying to do.
Is there a physical chance of barring him from running in any of these cases?
Well, under Constitution Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, you're barred from running for any office position if you are a part of insurrection or sedition, which could be an argument to be made. The problem with that is we don't have a governing body to decide whether a president has done that. We've never had a president to challenge the Constitution to the extent where we needed a special court to decide whether or not he committed sedition or insurrection. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Do any of the charges currently explicitly include sedition or?
No. He's not being charged with sedition or insurrection.
Okay.
But he is being charged with conspiracy to obstruct, and they are going to introduce the insurrection, but that's not what is being charged with.
So you're saying those are charges to come yet down the line potentially?
No, I don't think so. They would have charged it already. But just so you know, the difference between the Georgia case and the indictment in the federal case, the real meat and potatoes, the evidence, there's actual audio of Donald Trump, President Trump, saying, I need you to find me the votes. So that's physical evidence, right? You got his votes. It could be a confession that is trying to circumvent the laws and try to get the legislature, specifically Brad Raffensperger, to change or find his votes, number one. Number two, there's video of Sidney Powell coming in with people and replacing them, kind of like in Soviet times. We are here to replace you, go home, like that. I mean, old school. So there's video on that. So from the Georgia perspective, I believe it's a much, much more difficult case to win. And just so you know, the federal government, once he becomes president, he has the ability to pardon himself, in my opinion. So as soon as he becomes president, he's out of trouble with the federal cases, in my opinion.
Can I ask a question on that? Does the federal presidential pardon power not extend to state crimes?
It's an absolute power that extends to all federal crimes.
Got it.
So,
not state.
Not state. However, it's never been used by a president to pardon himself ever. Nixon, I believe, contemplated it, but never used it against himself.
Right.
He had Ford. He stepped on the side and said to have Ford do it.
Right.
But President Trump has been advised by his lawyers, John Eastman, Kenneth Chesborough, and all these other right-wing, hardcore conservative lawyers, that he has the absolute right to do it.
Right.
In fact, Trump even said when he left power, he said, I could have given myself what's called a pocket pardon, where after I left, I could have used it. And I didn't do it because my lawyer said that wouldn't look good politically. So can he do it? I think he can. Do I have authority? No, that's never been done before. But I believe the Supreme Court the conservative Supreme Court will absolutely say he has absolute power, including himself.
Which one do you think is the worst case he's facing?
Georgia.
Georgia,
hands down.
Obstruction.
And he's not going to, how is he going to be able to explain what he was telling Brad Raffensperger, finding the votes, sending Giuliani to these, to these legislature meetings, playing videos, tricking them and basically cutting and splicing and dicing videos. Again, for the listeners who are listening, I'm not saying he's guilty. I'm a criminal offense attorney. Everybody's presumed innocent, but I'm letting you know that if the indictment holds to be true and they prove it beyond a reasonable doubt, then their goose is cooked.
I wonder if that'll have any effect on his electability at all. I wonder if it'll galvanize his base of followers. The stink of the attacks against this president are so deep, I feel. I think the public, to a certain extent, does recognize that he hasn't been treated fairly by the media or by certain parts of the political class. Here's what I mean. Personally, I'm confused about this president. Like, I'll just be open about it. I don't know. When he first came in, I didn't even vote for him, full disclosure. But then there was something refreshing about him, and I was like, wow, interesting. He's powerful. He's tough on foreign policy. He's tough on North Korea. He's tough on China. He seems to be trying to wrangle back some power for the U.S. in the foreign arena, in terms of funding for NATO, in terms of funding for foreign expenditures, for United Nations expenditures. And then but then you see that he was maybe one of the most polarizing figures we've ever seen, because you see, like, he offended so many people and he said such brash things verbally. So it's like, do you judge him by what he says? Do you judge him by his actions? And so I feel like this is such a difficult topic because, so many people feel that from the moment President Trump got into office, he wasn't really given an opportunity to govern. I know people feel this way, that as soon as he got in, we started hearing about the Steele dossier. We started hearing about golden showers. It was all over the news. We started hearing about the phone call, right? The quid pro quo. We started hearing about corruption on every level. We started hearing about, and then none of that was really making a dent. So the next thing became Russiagate. He's actually an agent for Putin. He works for Russia in some way. I mean, this is how far it went, right? I know that Representative Adam Schiff was pushing this narrative really, really hard. I wonder what the evidence for it was. I'm genuinely curious about it. I don't know.
For the Russians,
Russiagate.
there was nothing in there.
It ended up fizzling away, right? So I don't think
there was statements made by Michael Cohen that weren't true about Russia, about their intent to do business in Russia, that Michael Cohen told Congress that he lied about. Trump did have business dealings that he wanted to do in Russia. And, I'm not attacking Trump, but it seems clear that that wasn't necessarily true, that he didn't want to have business in Russia. In fact, he made overtures to Putin through his campaign, and also, I believe, through people that he knows, that he made it clear that he wanted to do business. But I think he withdrew before the presidential election because obviously it wouldn't be a good political move. So
let's look at it as, if we take that scenario.
I mean, there's a little bit of truth to it.
So let's.
There's always a grain of truth to anything that Trump is saying. He's just, I believe that everybody stretches out the truth a little bit to their advantage.
Let's take the truth that he potentially had business dealings in Russia, that he was interested in.
He wanted to, yeah.
He wanted to. He had in the past. He had the Miss World pageant, or the Miss.
I think so.
He's had
Moscow. You're right.
So he wanted to have more potentially, but the narrative against him wasn't so much business interests. It was collusion with Russia to steal the election. It really was. The allegation really was that harsh. That he.
Do you know why that allegation came out, Tony? Sorry to contact, because
tell me why, and was there any legitimacy to it? Because I'm just trying to bring us back to, there's a lot of suspicion for all of these attacks against former President Trump, and I kind of understand why, because of these prior attacks that have sort of fizzled out. But come back to it. Russiagate, right. Tell me.
So he's not a politician, right? He's unfiltered, correct?
Yes.
So there was a conference where he basically announced in jest, he said, it was a joke, Russia, if you're listening, please find the 33,000 emails that Clinton destroyed.
I remember it was almost as if part of a stand-up comedy routine.
Right. But
Russia, if you're listening,
but the problem is, here's a problem. There's diplomacy, and then there's politics, and then there's protocol. That wasn't necessarily proper protocol. I'm not saying that he was colluding with Russia, but certainly to his enemies that might have raised eyebrows, right? He put fuel to the fire when he said that. That wasn't a good idea. Would you recommended that Trump said that if you were his advisor? Or yeah, you should mention something like that? I don't think so.
I think he was full of bad ideas.
I just think he's an entertainer. He's a brash salesman. He's braggadocious. This is who he is.
100%.
And I've read
he's a bit of a comedian too.
Yeah, he's very funny. Apparently, I've never met him, but according to Mary Trump, who's his niece, who wrote the book Never Enough and Always Too Little.
Okay.
And so she knows Trump very well, and she's a psychologist. Unfortunately, I think this is all a part of what Fred Trump raised. Fred Trump was his dad, and Fred Trump raised a hyper competitor. So he is very hyperbolic. This is our first hyperbolic president. Think about Obama. Obama's more cerebral, more thought. When you ask him a question, amazing statements. But Trump is not like that. And people don't like it for different reasons. He says things that are controversial. He's said things that are controversial in the past. And he's definitely polarizing. And but then again, you know what? I'm going to push back on a little something that you said, Tony.
Tell me.
So you said that you don't know what to make of him. But again, I think the most important power that the president has is electing the Supreme Court nominees. And he elected 3 really conservative people that flipped Roe v. Wade, right?
Yeah.
So that's a part of it. And I'm not saying that was bad or good.
Right.
But when in my opinion, the best power, the strongest power that the president has, aside from foreign power of war, his civil power back in domestic power is electing Supreme Court nominees, right?
Yes.
Because they could change your trajectory for 30 years, 40 years
right.
on a ruling. So when you elect Trump, think about this, or you elect Biden, you're thinking, okay, who's up next at the Supreme Court? That's going to come up.
Right.
So, I don't vote for different personal reasons, but if I were to vote, I would say to myself, if I elect this president, who's he going to put on that Supreme Court?
Right.
That's what I'm worried. And also, number one, truthfully, would be, is this president a warmonger? Are we going to get into another, forever war like, with the Bushes, and in the past? And the second thing would be, who's he putting on to socially change the justice system, and which is the Supreme Court justices, right? They dictate what's legal, what's not legal, and so forth.
Right. I mean, I feel like I hear voices on both sides, and reasonable people disagree about him. I really do. I know on the extremes, people think that it's really love or hate with Trump, but I do hear some reasonable people in the center that can see, I guess, some of the pros and cons. Let me try to play devil. Let me try to steelman his case. It's difficult as a president. He is really polarizing, and I feel like he offended everyone to some degree, right?
Yes, of course.
He made statements that people use to say, well, that sounds racist.
Right.
Okay. That doesn't help. That's not smart.
Sure.
He made statements that people say that's clearly misogynistic.
He's not polished.
Okay.
He's not a polished guy. You don't vote for Trump if you want somebody polished.
Yeah. And I could say that for me, just being a fan of the Constitution of the United States, being a student of it and an appreciator of it, I kind of like, none of it really, I guess, bothered me because I took it as locker room talk or like whatever. It's just braggadocious bullshit and I'm good with it, until I actually personally got a little riled up when he started going after the federal judge who had Mexican heritage, had a Mexican last name. I don't remember what the last name was, but he started sort of like attacking the last name of the judge and making it almost seem like in a bit of a racist way, like that judge doesn't want what's best for America because he's Mexican. Well, first of all, he's American.
Right.
He may be of Mexican descent.
Right.
He may be Mexican-American, whatever.
Right. Just the way Trump is a German-American.
How about me? I'm an immigrant to this country. I wasn't a citizen until I was about 7 years old. I came from the Middle East.
We never had a Native American Indian president.
So
you came from Iran. You came from Iran.
Yeah, my family, Armenians, grew up in Iran. The revolution happened. The Islamic radical revolution of 1979. My family fled. I had the good fortune of being accepted under asylum to the United States. Grew up here. Tried to figure it out and fit in. It was a weird childhood, but then you find your way. Truthfully, it was really going through law school and graduating and just learning the system of the law, the Constitution, how it lays it all out. It really made me feel American more than ever, even more than getting my citizenship.
So if you love the Constitution that much, and I'm not trying to put the heat on you,
so much,
how can you vote for somebody like Trump who said we should undo the Constitution? There should not be a Constitution.
Did he really say that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't.
He tweeted that.
Yeah, I've never voted for him, full disclosure.
Or not tweeted, I'm sorry. He on Truth Social.
I haven't voted for him. I don't know that I would or not. But I do think that, I guess I was trying to say he is hated and he is beloved in this country.
Yes.
He really is. And if I'm going to steelman the side of the people who do love this president, they're going to say he's been unfairly attacked and he was never given a chance to implement any of his policies. That his general broad strokes policies are good, that they come from an intelligent, analytical place, that he is good for business, good for borders, good for at least sort of a more nuanced and smarter immigration policy.
Don't forget the Abraham Accords. That was a big deal, right? Bringing Israel together with Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, right? The Abraham Accords.
Yep. So some of his
foreign policy was good.
A lot of his foreign policy.
Some people were attacking him because he met the leader of Kim Jong-un, the leader of North Korea, a little early. But some people touted it, saying, "Look, there could have been peace." I mean, the one thing that you can't say about Trump is we didn't really go to war during Trump's time. That's the only thing that I'm personally happy about. The fact that we didn't start another war.
But we did just lay out some general broad strokes policy approaches that were not bad, that were good, that reasonable people could say are smart, good for America, maybe more conservative minded. So on the other side, he's hated. And if we're going to steelman the side of the haters, I think what would people say are there policy approaches that people attack him on?
I don't know, but here's the thing. Here's what's interesting. This person that's running for president has got three bazookas that are pointing at him. One of them is going to hit him. All right, 3 bullets that are going to hit him. He's got a bullet from Georgia. He's got a bullet out of federal court. He's got a bullet in New York, which we didn't talk about. The New York one was falsifying business records. That's not a big deal. I mean, that one he could probably do house arrest on that one. But that's the one where Michael Cohen paid $150,000, his attorney, to Stephanie Daniels, who was Stormy Daniels, basically to hush her up about some sexual escapade that they had at a golf
So
event.
that's the New York hush money.
Right, the hush money case. It's called, yeah. So
criminal case.
Yeah.
State of New York.
Yeah, he's got that case. He's got 3 other cases. So watch this, all right? Here's what's going to happen. Here's my prediction. I don't think he's going to dodge the bullet in the federal case. I've taken a look at the indictment. I'll tell you why, because they have Mark Meadows now. Do you know what Mark Meadows is? He's the former chief of staff. He's the president's right-hand man. He's going to be testifying to a whole bunch of ugly things, and it's not going to look good for President Trump.
Do we have a hint on what he's going to be testifying?
Yeah, it's going to say that he told him from the first day that he didn't lose the election, that the campaign manager told him that he didn't lose the election, that the Department of Justice ran a special investigation because Trump wanted it to be ran, and they came back and concluded there was no fraud. All these agencies, there was 7 or 8 agencies that ran fraud investigations that came back, and they told him in front of Mark Meadows there was no fraud. Trump didn't want to hear it. So Mark Meadows is going to basically testify to that he didn't want to hear it. He wanted to let the court sort it out. So up until now, he's been loyal. That's one. Sidney Powell just took a deal. She flipped. Jenna Ellis, she flipped. Ken Chesebro flipped. Everybody is flipping. And everybody's going to save their skin, and they're going to basically say Trump knew the whole time that the election was not rigged, that it was not lost. And what hurts Trump's case, in my opinion, is not necessarily that, but if Mark Meadows comes across, his right-hand man, all right, his number 2, aside from Mike Pence, who was really never his number 2, never his number 2. But Mark Meadows was the man that kept, up until the end, his peace, up until he realized he may go to prison, and then he flipped. So if he testifies that Trump knew about all of this, that's not going to look good in front of the jury. The jury's going to say, you know what? I thought about you, President Trump, in a different light before. Now, after hearing Mark Meadows testify, I'm looking at you in a different light. And remember, there's a cumulative effect. Think about this. This is like a house of cards that's crumbling down really slowly from a legal perspective. Again, not from a political perspective. If he was my client, I'd say, Mr. Trump, President Trump, you got a lot of problems. You got the federal government coming your way. They got witnesses. And yes, you're going to testify, but they got a lot of witnesses, including Mike Pence, your vice president, who's going to come and tell the jury that you allegedly told him he's too honest, insinuating he shouldn't be that honest. You've got Mark Meadows saying that you knew that the election was overturned. You've got all these other people that told you that you lost, your campaign manager. Even the people that told him that he didn't lose, Sidney Powell, he thought was crazy. He turned around and said, that girl's crazy. So that is evidence that he either knew or should have known that he lost the election. Not that he's being charged with that. Not that matters. But once the jury hears that, it's going to basically dirty him up. It's going to look like he used the United States power of the president to basically circumvent the votes.
Now, you say not that matters, but doesn't his state of mind actually matter if this is
not for this? No, he's not. No, the state of mind does not matter. He's not being charged. He's not being charged with whether he willfully knew that the election was overturned. That doesn't matter. In fact,
what are the elements that matter here?
So the elements that matter is that he had to have a conspiracy to defraud the United States by using dishonesty, fraud, or deceit to impair, obstruct, and defeat the lawful government with the function by which the results of the presidential election were supposed to be collected. He's also being charged with a conspiracy to corruptly obstruct and impede the January 6th congressional proceeding, and also basically a conspiracy against the right to vote for you and I, Tony. That's a conspiracy because it's taking our right away. So those are the elements, and that basically the Jack Smith says, and I'm going to read it verbatim, the defendant, President Trump, has a right, like every American, to speak publicly about the election and to even claim falsely. He's saying, look, you have even right to tell the public. I don't know if people realize the president could lie to public. That's legal. And he's saying that here. He has a right to falsely claim that there's been an outcome determinative fraud during the election that he won. That's fine. But once he starts taking steps in stopping the proceedings, the procedure of the government to happen, Jack Smith is now saying that's where you cross the line. You could go and lie to the people out and say whatever you want to say. That's cool.
Yeah, because lying is not technically illegal or a criminal act under the law.
Right. So that's fine. But they're saying now that you did the shady things that you did to try to get back into power, we're going to prosecute you on that.
Okay, but what if he really believes that he has correctly won and he's pushing every lever he can? I'm just steel manning his case.
So I'll tell you, if you correctly won,
devil's advocate,
he lost all his lawsuits. So if you're the executive of Apple, all right, and somebody's suing you and you're Tim Cook and you lost. You could go and say you won, but you lost.
Okay, but at what point did he break the law here? At what point did he allegedly cross the line from being a vigorous cheerleader of his cause?
Okay, that's a great question.
To conspiring to defraud us?
That's a great question. So according to them, a week after November, the election day, he designated Rudy Giuliani an attorney who was willing to spread false claims and pursue strategies that the defendant's 2000 re-election campaign would not do. Allegedly, John Eastman, who was an attorney, implemented a strategy to leverage the vice presidential ceremonial role. And that was the thing that he sent, basically saying, I got an idea of how we can make Mike Pence block the field goal, so to speak. Then you got Sidney Powell, who basically kept saying, we found the Kraken. And they call her Sidney Kraken Powell, funny, because her middle name is a K. And even the president admitted that she was crazy in front of other people, according to the indictment. Then we have other conspirators that basically went along and tried to circumvent what's called the ECA, which is the electoral count, which basically says all Mike Pence has to do is go give the votes and announce, and then they'll announce later that Joseph Robin Biden is the president.
So it was President Trump, John Eastman, that allegedly concocted this plan to move Mike Pence?
Yes, John Eastman. It was Chesborough. They wrote the.
So was there something in here? Am I wrong? Does state of mind? So why is it that state of mind doesn't matter if he needs to?
He's not being charged with a state of mind matter.
Fine. What is the charge again?
He's being charged with
conspiring
with
to defraud.
conspiracy,
right?
Which all that means is there's a meeting of the minds. So if I give you a wink and I say take care of it, Tony, and you go take care of it, that's conspiracy. Okay. Understand? So
conspiracy to what?
Well, to defraud the United States.
So to defraud, you need to know you're defrauding, right?
Yes.
So you need to actually voluntarily defraud. You need to know that it's materially, factually untrue.
Yes, to a certain extent.
Right?
To a certain extent.
Could he argue that, no, he believed he had actually...
No, he can't, because the government has had him checkmated. Mark Meadows is going to testify that a million people told him. The government agencies told him. DOJ told him. Homeland Security, everybody told him.
So at some point, you can't just put your head in the sand like an ostrich and be like, I don't care, blah, blah, blah. I don't hear anyone. I won. You can't.
That's what he did. Allegedly, according to the indictment. He didn't want to hear... I mean, think about it. I mean, everywhere you went, look at it from his perspective. No, Biden was in his basement in Delaware, running an election, and Trump was everywhere, running around like a hound dog from state to state, running mile to mile, covering every ground like no other the president has done. He probably ran the greatest campaign. To his mindset, he even told his staff members, how can I lose to that guy? He was shocked. This is going to come out, Tony, in the trial, that he actually said, how can I lose to that guy? Sleepy Joe, he called him, right? Sleepy Joe in the basement. Right. So he was shocked. There had to be something wrong. So when some of his people floated the idea like Giuliani, and we could get into another, podcast why Giuliani was doing that, and other people. So when he heard, hey, listen, your votes were being stolen, naturally, it gravitated to him. It made sense. Well, how can Sleepy Joe in the basement possibly beat me when I'm running around like a maniac campaigning? That made sense. But what he didn't want to hear is what Michigan and Arizona legislature say is, Mr. President, you lost because you didn't get the popular vote in our state. Translation, you just didn't get what you wanted because they didn't want to vote for you. And he didn't want to hear that. According to Michigan legislature and Arizona legislatures that called him.
What did he do allegedly when he heard that?
He actually told somebody, I don't want to hear that. There's something going on. He put in his mind, because at this point, Giuliani is digging into his brain. Sidney Powell is digging into his brain. And think about it. Like I said, it makes sense, right? How can possibly Sleepy Joe beat me? I was up in the polls. I was running everywhere. People love me. There was Trump signs. Did you see one Biden hat? Did you see one Biden flag? Did you see Biden protesters? No, it was all Trump, Trump, Trump everywhere. But what was hard for Trump to accept was there was secret Biden voters that weren't coming out in droves, that were anti, and a lot of swing state independent voters that weren't going to vote for Trump. And nobody back in the day was telling anybody, by the way, I'm going to vote and not vote. They were tricking the pollsters when they're calling. That's why the polls were off. Just like when Trump ran against Hillary Clinton, it was a surprise because people weren't being honest with the polls. The same thing happened this time, except it was a reverse. It would boomerang against Trump. People didn't want to admit they weren't going to vote against Trump. That's what it came down to. So it came as a surprise. So that, in my opinion, when Trump got this news from these, people in his staff saying you didn't lose and all this stuff happened, sure, I would believe it too if I was Trump.
And what if he honestly believed that?
That wouldn't matter.
What if Giuliani fed him
it wouldn't matter.
This fact pattern, and he decided in his mind, whoa, we've been defrauded of this election. And what legitimate route, I'm trying to steel man his case here, what legitimate route do we have to fight this attempt to steal the election? Do we have this route through Mike Pence legitimately as a vice president under the prescriptions of his power as a vice president? If he honestly believed that and he bought into the story fed to him by Giuliani and these others that were around him, is he really guilty of a crime?
Well, first of all, there are a few assumptions. Number one, the assumption is that he believed Giuliani. How can you believe somebody when everybody in the government is telling you that you didn't win? So if the Department of Justice, CIA, whoever it is, the intelligence agencies come to you, any designated agencies, there's in here, I'm not going to read off the agencies, but they ran special investigations, and they told him, President Trump, we like you. We want to see you stay, but we don't have anything here. So how can he possibly make that allegation and that assertion that that's what he believed? He could believe it blindly, as Mary Trump, his niece, would say. It's an ego blow for him, a huge ego blow for him. So maybe it's willful acceptance or blindful acceptance of something that he really wants to have happened. But that doesn't make it legal. And to answer your question, what could he have done? He already did. He sued every state. He contested it, and he lost every single lawsuit except, I think, for one.
And so the alleged point of the crime comes after all those lawsuits are
after
resolved?
Yes.
Okay. So therefore, you're saying, as a criminal defense expert,
yes,
I think I hear you saying that there was overwhelming evidence that the election was not stolen, and there was legal mandate in the way of court verdicts that said the election wasn't stolen. And so he could not put his head in the sand and just listen to one or two advisors, namely Rudy Giuliani. He needed to accept the reality, right?
That's what the indictment says. But look, President Trump is pissed. He's basically saying, well, that's not fair. He's saying that, well, people are telling me this, and that's how he feels. But the problem is, and you got to understand something about Trump. So he has a lot of yes men that work around him. He doesn't like people that are combative. When he says something, he wants it done. So the people that know this are whispering in his ear, you didn't lose. There's no way you lost.
Right.
And to him, it makes sense. How can I lose against a zombie that is in his basement? How is that possible?
Is that going to be his defense here?
He wanted to originally, so the update's been, he wants to basically say, I'm going to rely on my lawyers. My lawyers told me. But the problem with that is if he relies on his lawyers, he's waiving his right to attorney-client confidence. And if I was his lawyer and he's going to throw me under the bus, you know what I'd say? I told him he lost the election. I would say that on the stand. The
Especially
lawyer,
if that's true. I mean, that would be true.
and it wouldn't be false if it wasn't in the indictment. Tony, I've been doing this 20 plus years, okay? When the federal government gives you an indictment and they put it down, they have you. When they say when the feds got you, they got you. So I would be shocked if they don't have this evidence to back it up. it's airtight. When the federal government gets you, it's usually airtight. They have Mark Meadows. They got the testimony. They got Michael Cohen. They got Chesborough. They got Eastman. They've got Powell. They got Jenna Ellis. They got all these people that are going to be pointing their guns at Trump. Now, the best thing that Trump could do, in my opinion, is completely turn this around and saying, this is just political. This would never happen to anybody else. And then pray basically for what we call jury nullification.
So if he was a Joe Schmo and he showed up and he said, this is political, none of this really happened, it'd be so easy to say, you're full of shit, get out of here.
Right.
But this particular individual can actually point to the phone call with Zelensky, the Steele dossier, Russia
No, he won't.
gate.
No, I got to stop you. He's not going to be able to.
But just to finish my thought,
Yeah.
it could be crazy, but there's a long trail of institutions, media institutions, political institutions, governmental institutions bringing charges against Donald J. Trump, which ended up fizzling out or not being true based on potentially politics. The Steele dossier, not to beat a dead horse, the phone call, Russia gate. He could point to that and say, this is yet just another one of these political attacks. And so even if he gets convicted and he loses and he's criminally liable, he may be able to still change public perception in his favor and say this is yet another attack, because there have been so many attacks in the past that haven't panned out.
Right. So there's two courts, in my opinion. There's a court of public opinion and a court of law. So you're right. He might be able to persuade public opinion, but I'll tell you right now, the judge will shut him down. If he starts rambling and talking about irrelevant things about Zelensky, judge is going to say, hold on a second. That wasn't the question you were asked. You weren't asked about Zelensky. You were asked about this. It's a yes or no question. That's how it's done in federal court. Trump's going to be on a tight leash. And if he goes and pulls that leash, I'm going to tell you, the federal judge will hold him in sanction and contempt. And
so can I just say
that's not going to look good.
So I think what you're, in the federal court system, none of these prior political attacks are going to be relevant and it's not going to come in.
Not in my opinion.
However, in the court of public opinion, he's probably going to pull on that hard. And he's going to try to sway this entire thing as a kangaroo court, as a political prosecution.
And he did that right now in the New York case, in the civil fraud case, just to touch upon that. He's basically calling Judge Enrogan a fraud, a hack.
Right.
He's saying, they're out to get me and they're shutting me down. And
so he will claw and punch at and wrestle with the justice system and even bring it down, trying to save himself.
So here's what I think he's doing. There's a saying, when the facts are wrong, you argue the law. When the law is wrong, you argue the facts. When both of them are messed up, you argue against the procedure.
All right.
The system, yeah.
Right.
So that's what he's doing right now, saying the system is messed up. And, here's the defense to Trump, all right? I do believe that it's curious that all these things are popping up. How can you not see it as a weaponization? And even if you don't see it as that, I just think the optics look bad. And I know people are going to start, replying on this podcast and saying, how can you say that? He's breaking the law and you're giving him a pass. You're just a standard criminal defense attorney. I'm not talking about a regular person. I'm talking about the president of the United States and what's perceived as weakness from other countries looking at us. Well, how does Putin think of it? What does Putin think of us? What does the other world leaders think of us? It just looks bad. And if you jail Trump, where does it stop? Who's next? Right? And now what's going to happen is, if Trump is elected, is Trump going to weaponize the Department of Justice and go after Biden and his son and everybody else? Do you see where the slippery slope goes?
It's horrible. It's a terrible look for the country as a whole.
Yes.
And if we look at it, there's been a lot of restraint historically to prosecute a president. This is the first president in U.S. history against whom an indictment has been brought. No one's been indicted. I think I'm right. Fact check me on that. I researched it a little bit. It seems like there were a few run-ins with the law.
There was a couple
on
presidents.
Criminal law.
Yeah.
Criminal law.
There's one president with a horse buggy that he was driving too fast.
So Ulysses S. Grant.
I think that's what it was. Ulysses S. Grant.
On a horse.
That's it. That's what I was talking about.
Sped around a corner somewhere.
That's right.
I don't know.
No, he's going to his job. He's going to work. He's going to his, and he got warned twice. And then the cop basically said, I'm going to have to cite you. And he was a misdemeanor back then.
There was an African-American police officer who saw him flying down the street around the corner on a horse super fast, stopped him and said, Mr. President, you're going too fast.
Right.
He said, you're right. Something to the effect
That's right.
of, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
I should not do
You're
that.
right. Yeah, that's what he said.
So I think the very next day, he flew down the street again
That's
and
right,
turned
did
the
it again.
corner.
Yep.
Super fast.
Yes.
The same African police officer said, Mr. President, I'm going to have to arrest you.
Yes.
And then he said something to the effect of, you're right, you should.
Yes.
Went to
court, went to trial.
complied with the arrest.
Yes.
Went to court or whatever.
Yes.
Paid $20.
Yes.
And left. Now, very interesting story, because here you have the person at a pinnacle of power in this country,
Right.
Ulysses S. Grant, who one of the most pivotal,
The greatest general, Civil War.
a Civil War
general.
premier Civil
The
War.
one that brought down General Lee.
Right.
Talking about the person that brought down General Lee. Think about that. The Confederate general.
Right.
That was Ulysses S. Grant bringing down a federal general, and he was the guy that was being arrested. I mean, he was loved by the North. So
Robert E. Lee's nemesis,
Yes.
Ulysses S.
Yes.
Grant, who led the fight against slavery in this country.
yes,
Okay, won the fight on behalf of President Abraham Lincoln.
Yeah.
Won the fight against slavery.
right.
And it seems like, and I've read his autobiography, or was it a biography? I think I read both. It seems like he genuinely was, in a very deep and heartfelt way, trying to mend relations between the North and the South.
Yeah.
He was not prosecutorial against the Southerners when they lost the war. He kind of said, give them back their guns and everybody go home, to a degree. Maybe President Lincoln kind of spearheaded that, but it's so interesting that president had a run-in with the law. It's just a speeding.
I know how,
it's a speeding thing.
And since then, it hasn't happened. Now Trump's in the.
But it's interesting that an African-American police officer
Yes, very interesting.
pulled him over, arrested President Grant, took him to jail, I guess, made him pay a fine. But then it seemed like maybe I'm being way too romantic about our system, but on some level, does President Ulysses S. Grant go, you know what? Fuck it. I am going to speed by that same black cop tomorrow, and I'm going to get arrested, because that is what should happen. And I'm going to show that I'm being romantic here. I'm going to show that I'm not above the law, and that a black police officer has the jurisdictional power to arrest me. And
That's quite some theory.
I'm being naive, maybe. Yeah. I'm being romantic. But in a way, didn't he solidify the very idea that he fought for in the Civil War?
Yeah.
That nobody's
above the law.
Above the law.
Including the President of the United States.
You're not above the law because you're white.
Right.
And he, in a way, he sort of demonstrated that in getting arrested by the black cop.
You know what? That is a great theme. You're not above the law, but I think there should be, in my opinion, a special tribunal for presidents if they're being prosecuted, because they should. They're executives of our branch, United States branch. They have secrets that most people shouldn't know about. They should be treated a little differently.
We need them out of jail.
Maybe even professional jurors. I know that sounds crazy, but just professionals that could sit down with law degrees and sit down like myself and assess the facts just like a surgeon would when they're looking at MRI charts. Does that make sense?
Yes. And I know that there are, broad strokes, certain safeguards built into the Constitution, like written into the Constitution for the executive branch, for the president, like certain, and again, we would have to go really deep and specific to be accurate about it, but there's immunity built in of some kinds on an executive level. There's privileges built in of some sort.
Executive privilege.
I'm being real broad strokes.
Yeah.
But there are some protections built in for the executive branch and for the head of the executive branch, the president.
Except for fraud, which is why President Trump is now being charged. That's the only exception to the rule. So you're allowed to do whatever you want as a president, but once you start committing crimes, just to give you an example, you know that he was impeached for inciting an insurrection, but he was never convicted or even charged for it. So Adam Schiff brought that with the Democratic Party because he incited the insurrection on January 6th, but he was never charged in criminal court.
Right.
Okay.
And let's also say that those impeachments never went full term. They never went to the end result, which is having him removed.
Right, having him
for
removed.
whatever reason.
He was never, because it's very difficult to get a president to be removed. I mean, he's got to do something. No president has ever been removed before. I think you got to make a big case. Like, this president is going to cause this country a lot of pain, you know? And yes, he shouldn't have said to Zelensky, you know, quid pro quo, I'll do this for you. I'll give you the money if you get me a prosecutor that'll, investigate Hunter Biden. But I don't think it rises to the level of removal. It's almost like a censure. Do you know what a censure is? They give censures in the House of Congress where they basically tap your finger, go, no, 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 don't do that ever again. They did that with Marjorie Greene. They did that with a lot of different senators and House of Representatives.
Most recently, wasn't Adam Schiff censured?
Not sure.
For bringing the Russiagate allegations. Or
I'm
at
not.
least I
By the
believe
Republican. Right. So that's politics, right? Because
That's politics.
Right.
I'm not saying it's not accurate though, because
Right.
where's the evidence for all the allegations
Right.
that was pushed upon us as a citizenry of our executive in chief or chief
Right, but
commander in chief? We were talking about it's difficult to remove a president.
Right.
It should be difficult to
Yes.
remove a president. That's our number one leader sitting at
Yes.
the top of our system. If we go back quickly in history, we talked about Grant. That was
Right.
just a speeding thing. He got arrested. He paid a fine.
Right.
We had two others. We've got Bill Clinton.
he was never arrested, but he was
No
impeached.
arrest. Criminal charges were never brought. He was not indicted. He was
Yep.
potentially under threat of indictment for
Yep.
perjury,
Yes.
criminal perjury.
That's right.
Never brought. He negotiated his way out of that.
Right.
And we had President Nixon. He was under threat of indictment for some kind of corruption or obstruction.
For the Watergate burglary, for the cover-up after, and probably the setup.
Would it have been similar obstruction charges to what President Trump is facing? Not really. It was an election.
That was a
Tampering.
burglary, tampering, cover-up. I'm not sure if they would have
Against
bought it
the
in federal
DNC
court.
offices.
Yeah,
So
maybe it would have been federal. Yeah,
He was not indicted because he
no,
resigned.
because he jumped ship right away.
He resigned. And so,
Right.
so maybe recognizing the benefit to the United States as a whole of not having a president be indicted, he jumped ship, as you say.
Right.
He got out of the way and we didn't have to deal with it as a country.
Right.
So here we are. It's our first time having to deal with actual criminal indictments
Yes.
against a former president, potentially the next president. So back to that. You feel like Georgia, you said they have a very strong case. Federally, you said, oh my God, he's got a bullet aimed at him, and you believe he's got a real tough case ahead of him federally on the corruption to defraud or the conspiracy to defraud.
Yes, but he's got a good wild card. You know what the wild card is?
Tell me.
Donald Trump. If I ever had a client, if I said, who would be the client that you'd want to convince a jury? It'd be the President of the United States or the Pope, one or the other. The Pope or the President, I'll take either one. Those are good candidates to explain to 12 people that you didn't do what they're saying that you did. People will give you a pass. You're the President of the United States. So he's got that.
Is he going to have to convince the jury? What's his story to convince these 12 people that he's not guilty criminally here on the federal level? Does he have to convince them that there really was an attempt to steal the election? Or does he just need to convince them that there's political attacks against him? Like I told you before, all these different things. We didn't even talk about the impeachments, the two impeachments that did not go to the end. Is this how he convinces these 12 people?
All right. So the law is very technical. Think about when you're a kid and you have a block box and a circle hole, right? You put the holes. There's going to be elements to every crime, 3 or 4 elements. If those elements are met, they're going to ask the jury, are those elements met, yes or no? And if they are, he's convicted. He could tell all the stories he wants. He could tell everything about what he did for the country. He could say that they're after me. At the end of the day, they're going to ask the jurors the questions.
What if there's one juror on there that loves Donald J. Trump?
So
we know that people love this man just with a passion across the country. Some people hate this man.
Yeah.
Does it just take one juror to love him?
So what you're talking about is something called jury nullification. Does that exist, and what is jury nullification? Jury nullification is when basically a juror says, I don't give a shit, I'm going to vote not guilty. That's jury nullification. It's against the law. It's not supposed to happen. Does it happen? Yeah, sure. If it's a movie star, maybe Michael Jackson's jury nullified him for molesting. I mean, there's evidence now supposedly that he actually did it. Who knows? Will they nullify Donald Trump's verdict? Yeah, maybe a jury will say, you know what? That's President Trump. I believe that he believed that there was fraud going on. And therefore, I'm not going to convict the guy. I think it's political, and I think they're weaponizing this. Sure, that could happen. I really don't know how it's going to go because it's the first time a president has ever been prosecuted before. It's
crazy. But you feel like, it sounds to me like if you analyze the elements of the law, you feel like his case is weak. But if you get into perception and what's inside a juror's heart for this man, and also the trail of the past abuses he may potentially be able to show that have come against him from big institutions, maybe that's his escape hatch here?
So if you told me, take a look at this, all right, this is like his MRI chart, and I was a doctor. Okay, I say he's got stage 4 cancer. All right, that's what this is. It's stage 4 cancer.
Shit.
Is there a possibility that he could convince 12 jurors that he doesn't have stage 4 cancer and everything is fine?
Or one.
Or one? That remains to be seen. That's going to be up to Trump. That's going to be the fight of his life. I don't know the answer to that question, whether or not that could happen.
Okay, if he gets convicted, does he still potentially have a chance to run and sway public perception?
Article Section 3 and of the 14th Amendment, Article 3 says that you're not supposed to run, or you could be barred from running if you have committed insurrection or sedition. But he hasn't been convicted of that. So the answer is
he hasn't even been charged with that.
Not at this point. So they're doing
far
is
he dodges the 14th Amendment nullification.
well, they're trying to do that with the states. The states are trying to block him. They're going to different states and trying to block him from being certified in that state. But I think that's a Supreme Court question. And if it goes to the Supreme Court, what do you think the Supreme Court's going to do?
You mean they're trying to nullify his candidacy in just one state? And
Few states.
In a few states.
Yes.
And therefore kind of de facto make him ineligible?
Yes. Some people have filed lawsuits in certain states.
That seems like it would
It's contrary to the Constitution.
with the federal government's power to have an election across.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You hit the nail on the head.
Yeah, I don't think that's going to fly.
It's not.
Yeah. So then we come back to he's got a difficult run with the criminal case federally and in Georgia. What about New York?
New York is
That's the hush money.
New York
case.
is not really a big deal. Big deal. He paid somebody $150,000. He made Michael Cohen write a check.
It seems more of an
Trump. I mean, I don't know what he's looking at, but I can't imagine it being a lot of time. I wouldn't be concerned about him if I were President Trump.
Under public perception to the average person out there in the center, the average reasonable person, are they probably thinking, okay, it was hush money to a prostitute. It's ethically wrong. It's morally maybe despicable. It's also realistically what world leaders have done throughout history.
So what you're talking about is weaponization. Are you asking me whether or not they're weaponizing the government to go after Trump? I don't know the answer to that question.
Yes.
It looks like it, but I can't answer that. Or could it be that he exposed himself, right? I mean, if you're going to be on the radar, and who's more on the radar than the most popular person on the planet, which is the presidents of all the countries, right? So maybe he thrust himself, into that light. Maybe he flew too close to the sun, so to speak.
I mean, he's done that time and time again, and yes, he has. He's absolutely flown too close to the sun. He's even been burned,
He's like
but he survives.
Yeah.
What about Florida? From what I heard, there's criminal charges for documents.
Yeah, the retention of the national retention documents of the. He had apparently some secret documents that he held, and under the NRA wanted it back. They gave him a call. They apparently tried to. They sent him letters, and he ignored it. He just had boxes that were located in his bathroom at Mar-a-Lago, which is the place that he lives at right now.
Okay, so how serious is this Florida criminal case, the documents case, in comparison to New York's hush money or the federal in Georgia conspiracy to defraud? I know that you're going to say conspiracy to defraud is by far the most egregious and important one here, right?
The documents case is the least.
But the conspiracy to defraud federally in Georgia,
yes.
This is where you feel
the Georgia case, in my opinion, is much worse because he can't pardon himself in Georgia. He could pardon himself out of the federal cases, but he's still stuck with that Georgia statute.
And we're not sure what a criminal conviction on the state level means if you're actually running for or are elected president of the United States, where you're the top of the heap in the federal system. I don't know.
I don't know what that means either, but procedurally, just from being a lawyer, I think what would happen, and logically, the courts will, out of the interest of justice, stay, S-T-A-Y, stay the proceedings, which means freeze the proceedings, let him be the president, and then when he leaves the office, he'll have to deal with it at that point in time, which is a nightmare because what are you going to do? You're going to put the president in jail 4 years after he leaves the office? How's that going to work?
So before we go, we're getting close to the end here. Let's take a guess. I've learned so much talking to you about the procedures, about the criminal elements of these cases that I'm going to make a guess here. I could be completely wrong. It feels like the New York hush money case is kind of a non-issue. It's going to be a lot more noise than signal. in the perception of the public when they come to vote for the 24 elections. Let's put that aside. It feels like the Florida case for documents equally is going to be mostly noise, but not a lot of signal. It's probably not going to cut through to the core masses, to the swing voters or to the centrists who are going to maybe sway the election. Let's put that aside. We're left with the conspiracy to defraud. Georgia, we're not sure. It's a state level thing. There's evidence against him that is equally bad, maybe on the federal level. Let's look at that. That's going to be the one. So let's look at that for a second. Federal case, conspiracy to defraud. If he wins that case, he's going to have wind to his back, huge momentum going into the election. If he loses that case, there's not a 14th Amendment block to him running for office because it hasn't been sedition or...
He hasn't been convicted of sedition.
He hasn't even been charged.
There's no body. There's no, like, you know how when you're a lawyer and you're going to lose your license, there's a board there's no board for that.
Okay, so the takeaway seems to be whether he wins or loses that most pivotal federal case for conspiracy, he is still going to have the ability to run. He's still going to be able to potentially sway public perception enough to win. He's still fully in the running, even given all these criminal cases. That's my guess.
Yeah.
Looking at it.
Yes.
I don't know if that's good or bad. That's going to take a lot of deep thinking about, but right? Would you disagree? I mean, none of these seem like they're going to necessarily derail his candidacy.
Well, I don't know much about politics, but I'll say that if he gets convicted on any one of these charges, I'm assuming there'll be independents that'll be bothered by it, that won't want to vote for him. And because, you know, they might be thinking, okay, I want to vote for him, but what happens when he goes inside and becomes a president?
Very interesting.
That's going to be on his mind. I mean, I want somebody clear-minded when they go into the office. I don't want him worrying about going to jail for 4 years. I don't want him directing DOJ or anybody else in that executive office to get him off. I don't want my president worrying about that.
So let's take the perfect voter. Let's put a voter dead center.
Yeah.
Politically not inclined to the right or the left. Reasonable, smart thinker. Right. Let's try to pretend to be that person. And you're sitting there and you look at this final decision, a conviction from the federal court, conspiracy to commit fraud against the United States and its citizens, this quote-unquote election tampering charge. You look at it and you go, okay, so the federal court convicted President Trump. Now, what do I decide? Do I decide that that's one step too far for me and that's going to swing me to the opposition, maybe Democrat, maybe Biden? Or do I feel that they've been after this guy forever? It's just another case of them being after him. And so, you know what? I'm going to show them even more. I'm actually going to vote for him. Could we see that reasonable centrist voter coming up with both those thoughts? Maybe I'm being too kind. Maybe not. I'm going to come on the side of maybe they're going to lean towards, no, I can't vote for him with a federal conviction for conspiracy to defraud. That's my vote. Well, that's my guess.
I think that his base will be galvanized to vote for him, and it'll be the equivalent of, crucifixion. He'll go up in the polls in his Republican base.
No question.
No question.
But we're talking about this perfect, ideal centrist voter.
Right. So that's what's going to swing. That's where he lost the last election. He lost the centrist voter. He lost the independent voter.
So it seems like
is the independent voter going to say, you know what? I want to vote for this guy that's been convicted of a crime. What's going to make them do that? It sounds like a complicated candidate.
Right.
Do you want your president stressed out all the time? Do you want to read as soon as he goes into the office is worried about going to jail? That doesn't sound like to me he's going to make clear decisions.
So then I think the next key question is, because we both agree that conviction in federal conspiracy charges would potentially swing these key voters.
Some of them.
When does that conviction come down? Is it in time to swing them?
So in federal court, you could continue the sentencing. I would assume that Trump's attorneys are going to say, now that he's been convicted, we want to continue the sentencing. So let me explain to you how that happens. A lot of people don't know. Good question. So did you know that you could enter a plea of guilty but not have a record? How does that work? So pleading guilty doesn't mean that you're convicted. Sentencing means you're convicted. So you could plead guilty and then take a trip around the world for 5 years and you're not convicted. When you come back for your sentencing date, when the judge hits the gavel and says, Mr. So-and-so, you are now convicted, that's when you're convicted. So Trump could plead, continue the sentencing in eternity until he becomes the president.
Do you mean plead guilty? Because if he pleads
Found guilty.
Okay, if he's
He'll
found guilty,
he'll never plead guilty.
I think if he'll never plead guilty. I agree.
Right.
If he's found guilty, even though I understand your point that that's short of sentencing, that's short of getting the legal stamp of guilty.
Right.
I agree. But I think if he's found guilty, that's probably enough to swing these centrist voters.
Maybe not. You know why? He's going to appeal it.
He's going to appeal.
He's going to appeal and say, I was screwed. They didn't give me a fair trial. There's a million things on, and that's always going to be a little cloudy. So
It's going to be cloudy. But
some of those centrist voters might give him a chance to say, you know what? I don't know what's going on. Fine. I don't like Biden. I'll swing his way.
Is that in time to affect the election?
That's the key. When is his trial going to go? And, there's got to be buffer. A month is an eternity in politics. 2 months is even longer. So the more time that he has attenuated from his convictions is better for him.
We have a year to the election.
Yes, but his trial is supposed to start, I think, around May. So it's going to be really tight.
There's no way they're going to come up with it. There's not going to finalize a verdict by December or by November, are they?
Well, everybody's pleading guilty. So they didn't think so before, but everybody's jumping ship right now. Everybody's, falling on the sword. So this is going by a lot quicker than people thought. And I predict that Giuliani will probably plead guilty and flip on Trump.
What are the charges that these closest to him are facing, which is making them turn? Are they facing life in prison or anything that crazy, or just years?
They're facing years in prison, absolutely.
Like a handful of years?
Yeah, I have to look up the...
Okay.
Well, it depends on the sentencing guidelines. Okay. So
no one's interested in doing a day in prison, of course.
I'm not going to bore you, but it depends on your background. Okay. Obviously, President Trump doesn't have any criminal background. It depends on the charge. It depends on whether you went to trial, whether or not you pled early, and so forth. Okay. But they're looking at prison time, 100%. Giuliani's looking at prison time. Trump is looking at prison time. I think Giuliani's going to flip because he owes millions of dollars to his lawyers. He can't afford a lawyer right now. So what option does he have? He's going to have some lawyer up in Bedminster or wherever he hired to represent him, which I don't think is going to go very well for him.
Wow. It's so interesting. I mean, we're going to have to watch this so closely.
Talk about the fall of Giuliani. That's another podcast that you could do. The rise and fall of Giuliani, America's mayor. I think that guy really screwed up Donald Trump, if you ask me.
Really?
Yeah, because he leaned on Giuliani too much and relied on him. And in my opinion, Giuliani's been a little bit aggressive with the law. And I don't know if you know this, but Giuliani was the guy that used RICO in the 80s to go after mafia. John Gotti, the crew, the Gambino crime family.
So he kind of broadened the ability to use conspiracy charges.
Yeah, and guess what? Now it's coming to bite him in the ass because they're using that same RICO that he used against the mafia. Now they're using it against him.
Wow.
Talk about the mafia celebrating right now, right?
Right. And in the law, that was where they broadened the prosecution to where, hey, it didn't really matter how specifically involved you were.
Yeah.
If you were involved in the conversation or the early stages of planning, or in any way that back and forth of information, you're in the conspiracy, right?
Right. So that they're charging them, President Trump, as though they are the mafia. They're treating them like a criminal enterprise. All right. They don't call it the mafia. They call it a criminal enterprise, which is a nice way of saying, whether you want to call it organized or meeting of the minds, it's within the same umbrella that's used to go after the mafia. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and that's what our federal government is currently bringing. That's the theory of their case.
The theory of the case,
our own former sitting.
So it's a Racketeer Enforcement Corruption Organization Act, RICO, and it basically says that if you and I do something together, if we have a meeting of the minds and you get other people involved, and we're all in the same team doing the same illegal thing, we could be charged with RICO. And it's typically used for mafia because the chain of command is, basically who they're going after.
I think because the mafia probably smartly had designed their information system in a way that shielded a lot of the higher ups.
That's right.
Like the higher ups were not totally in on the specifics of the
That's
crime.
right. That's right.
Rico says, listen, we don't give a shit. You guys are sitting there planning this.
That's right.
Part of a conspiracy. You're all going down. And now Giuliani.
And now Giuliani's and now the boomerang's coming after him. Now, can you imagine if you're in the mafia and you're sitting down, you're talking like, that bastard deserved everything he got. He did the same exact thing to them. He brought down, and again, I'm going to let everybody know that, everybody has family members, and he did it with impunity. He was just a monster. He took down a lot of people. So, if you're if you're an organized crime, I guess you're saying what goes around comes around, right? Karma.
Oh my God. I mean, this is going to be so heated to watch. Let's come back and do this again. Let's dive deeper from another angle. There's going to be a lot of developments in these cases coming up. This is going to undoubtedly impact the future of this country.
Yes.
Let's see what happens, man.
Let's see.
Soon.